If you've been told to pull up your socks, then make sure it's a pair of TNT socks. The TNT shop is now open at tntradio.live. Deconstructing psyops, propaganda, and mainstream media garbage. Connecting the dots. You're with Matt Ehret and Connecting the Dots on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
All right, welcome to this week's Connecting the Dots on TNT. I am very, very happy to speak with three very, very interesting experts today, dealing with different topics, ranging, always touching on the same thing, but ranging from deep history, geopolitics, economics, and a lot more. We're going to have Alex Krainer on as our first guest, the fantastic geopolitical, geoeconomic analyst from Monaco, who will be going through a lot of different developments around the world, a lot of geopolitical developments, especially regarding the anniversary that we're currently living through. Today is February 24th. It is the anniversary of the special military operation having been launched. We're going to recapitulate and assess a little bit about where we are now, 2 years later. Additionally, it is 10 years later, as I'm thinking about this, nearly the 10-year anniversary mark that we just passed, February 22nd, 2014, for those who remember, was the date that the Maidan, the regime change overseen by the CIA, the State Department in Ukraine, was affected fully. And so this is there's a couple of different cycles, the wakes of a couple of waves that we're currently surfing on right now. So again, very, very auspicious moment at the moment. We're going to also discuss some of the issues pertaining to the economic breakdown and some reasons to be, I think, reasonably hopeful, as Alex is quite good at both looking at the evil and also identifying points of weakness within the evil and also points of goodness that humanity has always somehow been able to rally around throughout history. So we're going to discuss that. We're going to talk to Dr. Eamon McKinney, a good friend of mine and who's been a geopolitical analyst, a writer, and somebody who has worked for 40 years in China with major Chinese companies. He himself hails from the UK, of Irish descent, from an Irish revolutionary sort of family. And Eamon is somebody you're going to really find very interesting. And again, he is a good analyst as far as somebody who has been able to recognize a lot of the inside jobs, a lot of the lies that we've been faced with from his early, from his memories as a young man, as a child even. He made a point that the murder of John F. Kennedy was something which really resonated deeply with him as a very meaningful point. Kennedy himself had an Irish heritage. His family had a connection with that. And so there was always a sense that something evil had taken over America with that murder. And his radar, as he's described to me, was always on, whether it was why we were going into Vietnam, why Iran-Contra was happening, what was really going on in the 90s or up to 9/11. So we're going to discuss some of these things. And we're going to end, as our third guest is Richard Cook. He's a NASA whistleblower. He's somebody who's worked in the civil service since the Carter administration in Washington and has worked through the Treasury Department, through a variety of sections within the U.S. bureaucracy. He's had a good finger on the pulse. But unlike many elements of the Washington bureaucracy groupings, he was disgusted by the filth that we've come to identify as the deep state. And so Richard has a track record of being a truth teller, and I've been very impressed by him. He's put out some very important material in a book called Our Country Then and Now that I've been quite impressed by. Myself being a historian, I find it very rare to encounter somebody who's been able to both identify the evil that has been done by the United States going back to the earliest days of its birth, but also at the same time not throw out the baby with the bathwater and recognize this powerful anti-imperial goodness, this tradition embedded in the best of the constitutional documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and many of the greatest leaders who usually get shot at. Usually don't you can recognize them by won their fruits while they live, as far as policy actions that uplift people to a better way, empower the nation to stand on its own 2 feet outside of the influence of private banking operations or British East India Company global corporate impulses. And usually you'll also see and recognize these figures throughout many, many generations since 1776 as not having lived through their presidencies or vice presidencies because they were unwilling to break with their conscience and what they knew to be true. So, like I was mentioning, Richard is somebody who has really exemplified an ability to walk that line. Not easy to do, not easy to do. And as again, speaking on that note, as somebody who's done a lot of work trying to recompile a more truthful telling of history, what I've found is that most schools, whether they're historians of the United States, of Canada, of European, Australian, whatever part of the world that they focus on, one, they make the mistake of being specialist in a certain region without thinking about the global chemistry that any region of the world is a part of. And that's the thing. If you want to think about true history, you do have to think about context. Context means in space, meaning all of the world, and in time, right? In terms of as much of the past that is knowable, since we are all living in the wake of the past, and we are all living in history. There will be future generations. The history doesn't end with us. Napoleon was wrong. Après moi, c'était pas la déluge. After me, it was not the flood. George Bush, the end of history fanatics around the neocon apparatus of the Project for a New American Century, who followed Francis Fukuyama, who believed also that the 1990s were the end of history, were also wrong. History is continuing, whether they like it or not. It's just this egocentrism. And so we have to think like the oligarchy thinks. And here I'm talking about the actual grand strategists who have been trying to induce humanity to accept willfully a system of culture and political life and norms of feudalism that would not differentiate us in any qualitative way from other forms of animals. Creatures you would see in a zoo, or maybe that you would have like as a dog that's happy just being a domesticated animal, getting scraps off the table and just being happy. That's what the oligarchy, all they've ever really wanted with us, is just to have human dogs that are just happy knowing their role as intrinsically inferior to the higher species, the higher bloodlines. That's all they've ever wanted. Is that so much to ask? Well, obviously it is. According to every human being that's ever spat in the face of tyranny and fought for freedom, yeah, that was a little bit too much to ask. And I think that's a little bit too much to ask all of us. But I'm saying this to get across that the oligarchy has always thought global. This is where the Venetian oligarchy, and I'm kind of rambling. I know that I'm rambling a little bit, but I figure, I've got some interesting ideas that I've been rolling around in my mind. And since we're just waiting for Alex Krainer to resolve some technical issues, it might be a worthwhile thing to just share a few of these ponderings and let you, the audience out there, chew on them and see what we can get out of them. And it'll also be useful when we do go into listening to Richard Cook. But now the oligarchy, this idea of grand strategy of oligarchs, of oligarchism, they were once centered before Britain became an empire. And this is actually something I was speaking to Richard Cook about. So he's actually sensitive to that, as is Amon, as is Alex. You're going to talk to three guests who are actually sensitive to some things that most people tend to ignore. Before the oligarchy took control of the British Empire, or the British Isles, constituting what became the British Empire, utilizing private banking, like the Bank of England, or the British East India Company as a global corporation, which was global. It wasn't Mediterranean. It wasn't British. It extended all the way from India, hence the name, China, Asia, all the way through to the Americas, Africa, and beyond. So it was a global corporatist empire, right? That's how one has to recognize the nature of whether it was the Dutch Empire that had a bit of a rival, a bit of a tiff, but eventually effectively merged, becoming the Anglo-Dutch Empire in the 17th century, or any empire. But before that, you had the Venetian Empire, because at the end of the day, the same families, the same structures, sort of migrate whenever they parasitically destroy a host area and make themselves thus vulnerable to a variety of things. The wars that they create often spin out of control because empire can only create wars to better control their victims. But wars are very messy. Sometimes they blow up even in the faces of those trying to manipulate them. We saw this in the case of World War I and World War II, where many children, family members of this inner oligarchy, this high level managerial class, ended up getting sent to the front lines and got killed. And here we're talking children from very high level classes of the oligarchy. And the oligarchy themselves don't fully know the outcome. Sometimes it doesn't benefit them. So we had this with Venice. In the case of Venice, they had made an 800-year career as the center of global finance, global bullion. We had the innovation of banking. From the Banco Siena, the Venetian banks were some of the most virulent banks that used Lombard families, the Lombard bankers, to carry out usury, economic warfare, finance all sides of every war, and usually just get people to fight over little things that differentiated them, whether language differences, whether different rituals in your Christianity, whatever is a difference you can fight. It's territory. You know, my grandpa says this area is part of my little mercenary kingdom, and your grandpa says the opposite. So let's fight. And the Venetians were always happy to fund all sides. So this got the better of them. But it wasn't that they were just doing this in Europe. The Venetians were also, and this is according to amazing research by Webster Tarpley from the 1980s and many others, Paul Gallagher from EIR, many others have demonstrated this thoroughly. We're utilizing the Khans, the Mongols. You know, the fact that the Mongol hordes from what's today Mongolia, the Khans, were able to emerge as such a powerhouse, and in a very quick time, starting in the 1250s, overpower every culture that they interface with. All the way through Russia. Most of Russia was conquered. India, Persia, destroyed Baghdad. The libraries, the Renaissance libraries of Baghdad and the Islamic Renaissance were destroyed, annihilated by the Genghis Khan and his heirs. China was subdued, taken under the control of the Khans of India. Same thing. The Mughals came out of that, and they came all the way to Eastern Europe, to Hungary. So we have here a problem where people think of this thing as being a self-contained power base that just arose unto itself, burning down villages, killing everybody in its wake, and not realizing that this was done through the support, logistical, military, intelligence support of the Venetians, the only power grouping of Europe that were given full access to trade corridors dominated by the Mongols. This is what Marco Polo was doing, advising Ogedai Khan. This is what his father was doing as part of a long line of Venetian high-level operatives. They were not just explorers. These were high-level intelligence operatives utilizing the Mongol hordes, which were a very pagan grouping, in the same way that the CIA and MI6 have cultivated and used ISIS, Al-Qaeda in our recent age, just as a weapon to destroy nations and cultures that you don't like, that are troublesome to empire. So that's part of it. That's also where we have the growth and the utilization of unreconstructed neo-Nazi fanatics in Ukraine, in even Georgia and Lithuania, and in a variety of Eastern European countries. This is where the grooming by the CIA, by MI6 of unreconstructed Nazis we found these groupings used like battering rams to destroy countries and to create geopolitical destabilizations for things that these groups in Al-Qaeda, in the Ukrainian Kiev-based Nazis, they don't even understand how they're being used. They think that they have a divine mission of some sort. So that's the thing. This is how we're being played. And so we have to think like the oligarchy. Think better than the oligarchy. Think global. Think in terms of context. Think in terms of global chemistry. And I guarantee you, if you do that, you will understand how people like Vladimir Putin are thinking, like Lavrov, like Xi Jinping. You will have a better ability to think like people who are actually utilizing the power of the sovereign nation state with an understanding of historical dynamics and the nature of the beast to do battle. So, with that said, we're going to go to a quick break. I've just been informed that Alex Krainer has resolved all issues technically and will be joining us after we return. on TNT, your news talk.
TNT's Chris Smith.
There's nothing humane in the boat people smuggler trade. Nothing humane about it or compassionate about it at all. This has always been one of the great delusions of the left. And if they didn't learn that lesson from the tragedy of the Rudd and Gillard government, when over 1,000 people drowned on the oceans to the north of Australia, if they didn't learn that lesson about 1,000 people, including women and children, drowning, well, they're very slow learners and they're bound to repeat that mistake.
But that's because their ideology superseded the practicalities of the issue, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Albanese from the left was always ideologically bound, almost fanatical, hysterical, about saying if you don't believe in taking all the refugees, then you're some sort of barbarian, a racist, a bigot from Western Sydney.
Chris Smith on today's News Talk, TNT.
Say this, and I'm going to say it just once.
This is today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
All right, welcome back to the second segment of the first hour of Connecting the Dots. As promised, the long-awaited guest, my regular recurring guest and friend, Alex Krainer, has made it into the digital space here. Alex, welcome to Connecting the Dots, or welcome back to Connecting the Dots. Glad that you could make it with us today.
Yes, thank you very much. I want to express my profound thanks to Windows, which decided to upgrade my Windows while I was trying to log into the Zoom call. And then after they did that, then they ran me through the whole thing, hustling me to install Windows 11 instead of Windows 10. So yeah, that was all worth it anyway. So it's the
well,
world
you broke
is a better
through that
place,
window. You broke through that window and you got into our TNT house. Very well.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
No, I was just sort of waxing eloquent a little bit while you were struggling with the technical issues, and the issue came up as I was opening up, thinking that okay, well, today is actually the second anniversary of the special military operation, which began February 24th, 2022. And it's also additionally the 10-year we just passed the 10-year anniversary mark of the 2014, February 22nd, finalization of the regime change that was the Maidan, not the whatever they call it, the March for Victory, as Chrystia Freeland calls it, or something. They've given some romantic name.
The Revolution
anyway,
of Dignity. The Revolution of Dignity.
That's the one. Yeah. The Revolution of Dignity. Yeah. God, it's disgusting. The branding of these things, eh? So anyway, I was hoping that might be a good place to get your take, opening up our discussion today. Where are we now? What is your assessment of did those who initiated this thing in 2014 or even before that, have they benefited? Have they gotten what they expected? What about since 2022? What's your assessment of the trajectory at the moment?
I think it's quite obvious, but I believe it's really worth keeping in mind that some 24 or so years ago, the same gang of people proclaimed the project for the new American century. They were preparing full spectrum dominance. They were preparing to eliminate every possible rival. They were talking about how the United States should, every few years, should take some shitty little country and slam it against the wall just to show to the world that they mean business, and so on and so forth. And here we are 24 years later or so. And I think that they are now light years farther away from having achieved their objectives than they were when they started off. They started with the unipolar order, and pretty much everything they touched turned to crap. And so has their excellent adventure in Ukraine. I think that I don't think that anybody anymore imagines that they can prevail in Ukraine, and the stakes of the game could not have been higher. So this is a summary defeat for Western imperialism. It's pretty much game over, I would say. Because, we have to keep in mind what was the objective. It wasn't just to preserve freedom and democracy in Ukraine. It was also to weaken and partition Russia. Also, what's very important to keep in mind, remember, Ukrainians were not interested in going to war with Russia. Ukrainians voted overwhelmingly for Vladimir Zelensky because he was promising peace with Eastern Ukraine. He was promising normalization with Russia. That's why people put him in the office, right? That's why they made him the president. And now the whole thing has been turned on its head. If Russia fell by any chance, if they managed to install some Navalny, Nemtsov, Juan Guaido type person, 100%, it would trigger a wave of anti-Chinese hysteria in Russia. And then the Russian military might, a few years down the road, would be aimed at China. They would use Russia as a proxy against China to destroy China, because their objective is to dominate the Eurasian landmass completely. And so they have to eliminate their rivals, which is now Russia and China. And then later you can more easily deal with Iran. But this is why, China has been so completely supportive of Russia, because they understand this. And so I think that in Ukraine, they have experienced a summary defeat. It's only a question of time. What we see now are just the imperial proxy flailing in desperation and agony. And it's only a matter of time when peace will have to be concluded on Russia's terms.
No, it's a very, very sobering point of analysis that you just delivered. And I was just listening to a Christian Amanpour interview with a Ukrainian MP who was saying that we are willing to go to war with Iran or with China to support our American allies because they have supported us consistently this whole time. And I mean, the level of this thing just being like we're just watching this psychotically spinning out of control, that despite all of the points and evidence of losses, that this is over. They need to like save face and like get back to the negotiating table to get something. They can't do it. It's like there's a psychological break or blockage. They've lost Zaporizhia and Kherson and now Avdiivka, and it's like Crimea a long time ago. And despite all of the evidence to the contrary, there's something that's propelling them forward. I don't understand exactly where this is coming from.
There are a few explanations, but along the way, they have committed many, many crimes, real crimes. They're protected now because the structure of power in the West is such that they are, let's call it, they are shielded by the political structure. But if, a defeat would change the political landscape, and they would have to answer for their crimes. So, they're almost stuck like in a gambler's ruin, where, you're going to keep gambling with any small stakes that you can scrape or steal or lie about, in the hopes that you can turn the situation around. That if you just keep doing the same thing, that at some point, some miracle is going to occur and it's going to redeem you. Whereas admitting defeat is not only geostrategic defeat, it's political defeat at home. And then, you're going to have to face justice. You're going to have to face the music before your own judicial system, before your own voters. And I think that that's going to mean a prison term for many of the people who were behind this project. And, we're going to be talking about Victoria Nuland and the whole merry gang of neocons. Joe Biden, John Kerry, Nancy Pelosi, Susan Rice, as a whole long line of people who will probably have to answer for this criminally.
Yeah. Well, this brings up the issue that I know you've written and spoken about quite at length. There seems to be a very visceral concern on the part of the various spokesman for the oligarchist interest of Alex Soros, Hillary, obviously, so many of them. They're freaked out by the prospect, the very possibility of somebody like a Donald Trump I'm obviously not, I said somebody like Donald Trump specifically, taking back some form of influence in the United States, that could overturn many of the things that have been put into place over decades and decades of building up this rules-based international order. Now, if Trump did come in, I'd like to get your thoughts on why are they actually afraid of Trump? I hear a lot of people saying that Trump is a controlled opposition, blah, blah, blah. I don't believe it, but I'd like to get your thoughts. Number two, it does seem like there would be a more positive relationship between the United States and Russia. Would that also play into an anti-China axis, as you just said, or would that be a different type of foreign policy pro-US Russia relationship, or more friendly US Russia relationship that would not be antagonistic to China as some would like to have it?
No, I think it wouldn't be necessarily antagonistic to China. United States can perfectly get along with China and negotiate and discuss issues, and because there's a lot to gain by both sides through simply constructive cooperation and trade. There's a lot we can buy from China, and there's a lot we can sell to China. It's a massive economic superpower. So if you're an entrepreneur in the United States, that's the best case scenario for you, because your country opens to a massive market where maybe you can sell something and make some money. The problem is that this is not about entrepreneurs, this is about collateral. And collateral matters only to bankers. Okay, it doesn't matter to you and me, it doesn't matter to ordinary businessmen, it doesn't matter to mom and pop shops, entrepreneurs, it matters only to bankers. Going back to your original question, we can get to the question of collateral later because it's really important. But no, I think that Russia is a natural ally to the United States, and it should be an ally, or at the very least a friend, and not a foe to the United States. And this is how it was while the United States was independent. So during the Civil War in the 1860s, the United States was basically, it was an attempt by European powers led by the British Empire to partition the United States and turn it into a weak, two or more weak client states. So we see that today. If they cannot keep Biden in power, if they cannot keep the same political faction, the Democratic National Congress, controlling the levers of powers in the United States, then they're going to try to partition the United States, try with the Texas secession, or whichever way. So either this power is going to be subservient to the British Empire, which, if that surprises people, yes, the British Empire is still undead, or it has to be eliminated, because if China and Russia and the United States create this axis of new multipolar order and become the guarantors of security for a long-term future, then the British imperial network is facing the wall. It's the end. And the Russians are coming for them, because the battle in Ukraine is merely the military conflict. There's going to be a legal conflict. Once Russia prevails, I'm pretty certain that that one of their next steps is going to be to pressure Western governors to repeal the Magnitsky Act, because Magnitsky Act creates a barrier, a legal barrier between Russia and the West. And the reason is because the Western financial interests have pillaged Russia during the 1990s, literally hundreds of billions of dollars of assets, hundreds of paintings, sculptures, you name it, was all stolen from Russia. Russians have hundreds of investigation files that need to go to Western judicial centers like London, New York, Cyprus, British Virgin Islands, Switzerland, and so forth. But the Magnitsky Act creates a barrier, making it impossible for Russians to pursue their assets and to find who their ultimate beneficial owners are, because that's going to lead to names. We're talking about them. The the judicial discovery process will lead us ultimately to the names, and I bet you there's going to be certain Jacob Rothschilds on those lists, and George Soroses and people like that. And then it's going to be on record, no more hiding in the shadows.
Absolutely. And since you've brought up the issue of Magnitsky, and this obviously, we're living just a little over a week since the death of Navalny. Navalny has more than a little bit in common, I think, with poor Sergei Magnitsky. And I think that there's certain elements of intelligence, certain Western interests that had a hold on a lot of these figures. Nemtsov even came up very briefly. There's a long list of people who played the corruption game, ultimately used up their usefulness alive, and found themselves more useful dead to their handlers. And you've written a book, very difficult to acquire, unfortunate book these days, on Bill Browder and the origins of the Magnitsky Act. Could you say a little bit about what you see as common between the current or do you think that I'm right in saying that there is something very, very similar in Magnitsky and Navalny, as far as what controlled them and how they've been used, and also number two, what was that really about? What did Bill Browder actually do? What is Bill Browder? For the last 5 minutes before our next break.
Yeah, so Sergei Magnitsky and Alexei Navalny had something important in common, and that's that they had the same boss, Bill Browder. Okay, the difference is that Alexei Navalny was a thug. He was borderline criminal, embezzler, extreme right nationalist, and a traitor to his country. Sergei Magnitsky wasn't necessarily. Sergei Magnitsky was an accountant, even though Bill Browder says that he's a lawyer. He never did get his law degree. He never practiced law. He's not a lawyer, but he was an accountant, and he worked for Bill Browder to help him. He wasn't directly employed by Bill Browder, but he worked for him as an advisor to help him dodge taxes in Russia. And in that sense, they illegally dodged taxes, but at the time everybody else did too. It was kind of like Ukraine today. It was a mess. It was extremely corrupt, but they got busted, and then Sergei Magnitsky ended up in prison. How he died in prison is a great mystery. But in the same way as Navalny died, it does seem that they have ways of I listened to some discussions with Larry Johnson and Ray McGovern, and Larry Johnson was saying how these things can be done. You pay some money, you slip in the poison, or you pay other prisoners to get the dirty deed done. So there is a founded suspicion that it might have been done by agents of MI6 or CIA. Both men are much more useful to the Western powers dead than they would have been alive.
Yeah, that's clear. Yeah. Did you hear about the Navalny wife hypothesis?
No, I have. Oh, well, I know that she's now taken over, which is nice because kind of good money is going to come with this from Western donors. And then, now that he's dead, she's free to enjoy her life with her new boyfriend, which whom she was together with even before Magnitsky died.
Ooh,
Yes,
I
you
didn't
didn't know.
actually know.
Yeah.
That's a
She
new
has
element there. No, because
she has a boyfriend, and there's photographs of her with her boyfriend that predate Navalny's death. So, now she's free to be out in the open with that, and gets all this money, friendship from Ursula von der Leyen, and hugs and kisses. Wonderful.
Right. A little starlet. She's probably gonna get to be on Vogue with her own Vogue photo shoot soon too.
Oh yeah, you bet.
I don't want to. I mean, I was just watching or not. It was actually an article first. That brought up how she had paid a mysterious visit. She was one of the last visitors who, before going to the Munich Security Conference, to beg for more money, which he ended up getting quite a bit, and also some security guarantees and deals with the French and the Germans. But she had given him like a box full of medicines and snacks and then got on a plane, head down
Yes.
to.
So that's very suspicious, obviously, because he did have health issues. He did have health problems, and so she took him medicine and snacks. Well, who's to say that somebody didn't give her medicines that were tampered with? Maybe
Yeah.
she wouldn't even have to necessarily know about it, but she was able to deliver them since she was his wife, right?
Mhm.
So that's quite a, if I were an investigator, I would definitely try that hypothesis.
Yep. That would be. So right now, well, actually, you know what? Before I go into another question, let's do a quick commercial break, and then we'll come back to finish this off with connecting the dots on TNT News Talk.
Give me a minute with TNT Radio's Steve Malzberg.
You all know Dr. Jill Biden. Of course, she's the First Lady. Here she is humiliating herself while talking to Hispanic Americans.
As distinct as the Bogotas of the Bronx, as beautiful as the blossoms of Miami, and as unique as the breakfast tacos here in San Antonio.
So say it with me. Si se puede. The future is ours.
A brain surgeon, apparently she's not. But she is a very selfish woman. She's the reason, I believe, that Joe Biden is being pressured to run for another term. Obviously, he can't handle it. I think she's selfish, and I'm not alone in thinking that. Kennedy of Fox News recently said the same thing.
But Dr. Jill has gotten so addicted to the glitz and the free dresses, and maybe they're not free.
Yeah.
They're very expensive dresses.
Yeah.
But the spotlights, the state dinners, the private jet. I know it's Air Force One.
Yeah.
But, the
Yeah, it
filthy,
matters.
dirty people who fly Southwest, they're not on Air Force One. She's got a house full of servants. They cater to her whims.
It's called elderly abuse, and I find Dr. Jill Biden guilty. Thanks for giving me a minute. I'm Steve Malzberg. Catch my show Monday through Friday, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on TNT.
When a crisis hits, close to home and across the globe, nonprofits are on the front lines, ready to serve. Healing, nurturing, rescuing, protecting, inspiring. The work of philanthropic organizations has never been more important, and it's donors and volunteers like you who make all this possible. Thank you. The Nonprofit Alliance.
You're listening to Connecting the Dots with Matt Ehret on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
All right, we're back for the third segment of the first hour, where we are continuing our discussion with Alex Krainer, getting his assessment on where we are as a human species in the midst of a giant systemic change. We're living through a big change. Now, some people say, Alex, that we're going into a potential, like a recession, that ultimately we could feasibly go back to the pre-COVID. We can make it back to a normal if we just say no to giving up our freedoms and stuff. We could just give a Nuremberg trial to the bad guys and just we'll go back to the way things were in 2018, 19, and things are going to be okay. Other people say that this is like a big systemic change, and that wasn't normal. That was actually what we thought was normal was actually not normal, and that we need a different way of thinking that deals with valuing the right things, having production, having manufacturing, which we lost already over decades and decades of deregulation, consumerism, and we need to go back to what should be a very different type of thing. I think I'm partial to the second one. I think you are too. How do you assess it right now? Do you think of this as like what type of moment in history are we living in at the moment?
Gosh, I think that we are at the point of discontinuation of a system that's been going on in various guises for more than 2,000 years. It goes back to 5th, 6th century BC Greece. It metastasized through the Roman Empire. It was the Greek bankers who went to Rome and started these big banking houses. Roman Empire was one of the purest and largest experiments in history in unrestrained oligarchic rule. And we've had, in Western Europe, there's been always an obsession with recreating the Holy Roman Empire for centuries. And I think that this is, for people to understand what an empire is, it's never a national thing. It's always a product of oligarchic rules, and this oligarchy kind of infects a nation like a parasite and uses that nation's wealth, military power, political power, diplomatic power to build an empire of colonies then it takes it extracts resources from those colonies and turns them into financialized flow. This is what Rome was. And then, Rome fell, but then the Catholic Church remained as a kind of ghost of the undead Roman Empire, which then got resurrected after the Crusades through Venice, the Dutch Empire, and then finally British Empire. And we can trace the evolution of law and ideology. And then, maybe with British Empire, it gets its fullest expression because it was the empire on which the sun never set. And it practically swallowed most of the earth. We know how they ruled. It was divide and conquer, rivers of blood everywhere, poverty everywhere, not only throughout the colonies, but also at home. Because, if you read books by Upton Sinclair and Charles Dickens, you know that even when the British Empire was at its peak, that the people in England were living in squalor, most of them, other than the small elite. And this has always been the case. And now we have this as well. It's the same model of governance. You have a small segment of the population in the United States and elsewhere in the West who live in incredible opulence, who are massively wealthy. And then you have the rest who are slowly losing the game. Their standards of living are imploding. You see cities across the West, especially the United States, being dismantled, people sleeping in the streets, people, going to the bathroom in the streets, taking drugs, infrastructure imploding. This has been always the symptoms of the unrestrained rule by a narrow oligarchy. And so this is coming to an end. A different model of governance is taking over, and for the first time in history, I think, the military powers that are opposed to this model of governance are actually more powerful and better organized, and they actually understand what they're up against. And then at the same time, the domestic populations at home are better aware of what the problem is and where the enemy is than they ever were in the past. So it's become very, very difficult for them to control the narrative, which is one thing that they had going for them for the last 2,000 years. They were able to control the narrative. And then people who thought otherwise were, a very small fringe handful of loonies that, you could silence easily, like putting Ezra Pound in the psychiatric asylum and saying like, oh, he's crazy. But now there's a solid percentage of the population who actually understands these things and who are actively pushing back. And I just wrote an article last week about this because it's making a real difference. It's making a real difference. And I put in a few examples that I find fascinating. But one thing that I didn't put in is the phenomenon of soft quitting or quiet quitting, which is a phenomenon where people go to work, they do their jobs, but they do the absolute minimum to keep themselves on the payroll. They don't go above and beyond. They don't go to meetings that are, non-mandatory. They don't stay up late. They don't come into the office early, and things like that. And it's like a slow rot at the heart of the system. And according to a Gallup poll from 2 years ago, from 22, it seems that as much as 50% of the employed population of the United States are quiet quitters, which means that they don't care. They're just going to work to collect their paycheck and then they leave. And this is very bad because you need an organization, you need people to be motivated, you need people to want to do better, to improve things, to take it above and beyond, and innovate and improve things. This is not happening. So
Yeah,
there's
right.
there's like a rot at the heart of the whole system.
Yeah, no, that's the sort of the lifeblood of any system is, like you just
Exactly,
said,
yeah.
the willful participation and excellence of the members of that society. And if they voluntarily tune out, check out, then that the very basis of that system's existence disappears. It dissipates, as you just pointed out.
The whole system becomes lethargic.
Yeah, exactly. Just atrophies. And the essay in question that you're referencing is a fantastic piece that people could read on TrendCompass, on your Substack, called "Humanity: Where Conspiracies Go to Die." Right, that's the essay you're referring to, and I loved it. I shared it with everybody that I know. It was a really, really fun, insightful piece, and in it you really zero in on the paradox of empire, of the types of conspiracies that require secrecy, hierarchy. It requires that most people who participate in the game don't understand what the game is doing, but it requires competence. It requires managers, technocrats, people who can manage things as specialists to maintain an effectiveness of getting closer to the goal, even if they don't know what the goal is, right? But that then is the paradox. You beautifully outline that as soon as you have competent people who know how to do their jobs and do their jobs well, which the empire needs, well, then you tend to also have competent thinkers who are more disciplined in their minds, who are unwilling to go along with actions that destroy their conscience or hurt their nation or their children. So all of a sudden you get this breakdown, this incredible thing. We've seen it throughout history as examples, but you give a few case studies to say, almost as if to say, you don't believe me? You think I'm just like philosophizing here? Well, check out these concrete case studies. And I loved your concrete examples. Maybe you could go through a few of those just for the listeners today.
So it's very important to understand this because people think that with money you can motivate anybody to do anything, but as it turns out, people actually care about justice and about ethics and about trust and about the meaning and purpose of their work. And so the first example that came to my attention was when when they had those when the Pentagon created this drone assassination program. And then it turned out that they trained these pilots to fly drones all over the world and to kill people. And then it turned out that these pilots were not really very excited about killing people that they didn't know for reasons that they didn't know, and they would protest. And the hierarchy would tell them, just follow your orders and shut up. And that didn't work. And so they started having a tremendous turnover among these pilots who would check out, who would say, claim moral injury or PSTP, and so they were quitting in droves or refusing to carry out orders. And so now, became a real problem for the Pentagon. And so now they thought like, okay, we'll try to work out AI systems for targeting. And so they started talking to Google. They created this project Maven, and Google was going to create AI solutions for these exact purposes. And then the engineers at Google flipped out, and like a dozen of them quit immediately. And the others started a petition to say, no, we will not be doing on this. And there was a mutiny at Google. And then this got even bigger proportion because some of these petitions ended up beyond Google, including like the Tech Workers of America, I think is the organization. And they demanded that neither Google nor Amazon nor any of these tech companies work
IBM,
IBM work on applications that are for killing people. And then they try to like, oh, no, 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 of course, this is not going to be for killing people. This is going to be for dropping vitamins from the sky to help them grow healthy and strong. But, you know, people didn't believe them. And so they refused. And so this was a real issue. And I think I think they didn't get anywhere with it. And then there was also the example of NSA. And we got in a Washington Post article a few years ago that NSA was losing hundreds of their best software engineers and hackers because they were not agreeing with the agenda. You know, so there they are, they have a job for life, they're well paid, and they say, I'm not doing this. And then the paradox is that usually it's your most capable people who refuse cooperation because they know their worth and they know that they can get a better job tomorrow somewhere else. So they say like, what, you want me to follow people so that you can pop them later? And they say no. And so they were losing hundreds of their best talent. And this keeps happening again and again. I came across many of these examples. Obviously, nobody advertises these things because they all want to project themselves as like an unstoppable force where everything is super sophisticated and organized and precise and accurate. But the reality is very different. And then as it turns out, because people are conscientious, ethical, you know, on the whole, not every single one, and they believe in doing good and having a good purpose and good meaning to their job, they very often fail to cooperate with these nefarious agendas.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. No, I think that, and there's so many other case studies too. We've just seen such a massive array of whistleblowers, people who are just unwilling to go along, to get along on every point that really matters here. So as you pointed out, as soon as you have people who are competent, that means that they can use their minds. That means they appreciate the quality of their minds, and that means that they can detect where things are going. Because part of using our minds is seeing and foreseeing the consequences of our actions animated by conscience. That's part of just being a healthy, competent person. So I really appreciate that that very clear analysis. This gets me at another question, though, that touches on what you were just saying about the collapse of the Roman Empire, and that there are very many similarities, obviously, to this breakdown we're going through, and the need for a realignment of our values, why we are, what the purpose of humanity is. Was there anything that Rome, in your assessment, could have done to have avoided the calamitous breakdown that it did suffer from through its own immorality, normalized stupidity, corruption? I mean, something like 240 days of the year I was reading were festival days in the capital. Like, that's a lot of decadence and going to circus and watching bloodbaths for pleasure, while you ignore the fact that you're just rapaciously using more slaves, making more enemies as the empire is getting more overbloated and extending itself. Very similar to today's kind of decline. Was there anything you think that could have been done to avoid that collapse?
Yes,
in 3 minutes.
Very easy thing. Curb the excesses of the oligarchy. And this has been attempt because, you know, what we call Roman Republic, which came after the overthrow of the last king in 509 BC, is that, you know, by eliminating the king, the sovereign, the oligarchy took over. And the oligarchy ruled without any restraint and very quickly, practically from the day they overthrew the king, the Rome started going in decline. And then you had many of these patrician families, people like the Gracchi brothers, Catiline, Julius Caesar, who tried to reform the system, who tried to put curbs on the behavior of the oligarchs. Had they been successful at that, I think it would have turned the situation around. And unfortunately, the Senate and a very small clique in the Senate, maybe 20 or 30 people, ran these death squads. And as soon as they said that somebody was aspiring to kingship, that is, curb their power, they would just assassinate them along with hundreds and thousands of their supporters. But the best case studies of curbing the power of the oligarchs is Russia, exactly, because during the 1990s, Russia was run by a group of oligarchs, the most powerful of whom were the 7 bankers, who were all trustees of Western financial interests. And Russia was run down like every place under oligarchy, including Rome, including Victorian Britain, and so forth. And then came in Vladimir Putin, who almost as soon as he won his first election, he set down all the oligarchs and he said, okay, you get to keep your illegally acquired wealth, but pay your taxes correctly, treat your people well, and stay out of politics. And so he insisted on this. They tried to challenge him. A couple of them had legal battles with the Russian government. In the end, the oligarchs had to make a peace with the fact that they were subservient, they were subordinate to the political. In the West,
all right. On that note, we've got 30 seconds, so we're gonna exit this segment. But due to a technical glitch by our next guest, Dr. Iman McKinney, who was supposed to come on, Alex, you've been so gracious as to continue this dialogue, so we can continue this after a short news break, and we're gonna come right back on TNT, today's News Talk TNT.